Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Is X-Men 97 a hit or is it a flop? That's the questions I have to ask regarding this relaunch of the popular Fox Kids animated series that ran on Fox Kids from 1992 to 1997. Now, X-Men 97 picks up where the Fox animated series left off in 1997, and many on the internet talk about how this show is such a hit. However, when we take a critical look at the Nielsen numbers, this show didn't really perform as well in the ratings as those on the internet want to claim it did. Now, X-Men 97 did get a lot of chatter going on social media such as Twitter and Facebook and many comic book message boards. However, that didn't really translate into big numbers for the Disney Plus streaming service. Now, on the first week of the X-Men 97 show in March, X-Men 97 did get 4 million views on the first episode, and those 4 million views had a lot of people believing that X-Men 97 on the surface would look like a big hit. However, as the numbers started to come out over the course of 10 weeks on this show, it turned out that those numbers got really low, and those numbers for X-Men 97 were actually lower than some of the more critically panned Marvel Cinematic Universe shows, such as Echo, such as Kamala Khan's Ms. Marvel, and She-Hulk Attorney at Law. And with those numbers being lower than those certified flop shows, it basically is showing that X-Men 97 wasn't the big hit that Disney Plus anticipated, and it wasn't the big hit that would basically show that there was this big audience that Disney expected it to be for this revival of the animated X-Men series. Now, a lot of people online, they made a lot of chatter about X-Men 97. However, what we found from that chatter was a concrete fact regarding comic books, superhero, sci-fi, and fantasy, and the internet. And that the internet really isn't an indicator to the success of a concept or a product, because with the internet audience, it's just when you look at the samples, yes, there are a lot of people talking about a show online. However, that's not really translating into subs for Disney Plus, and it's not really translating into actual numbers of people who actually watch the show. No, when it comes down to that original number of 4 million views, that's not even a drop in the bucket compared to even the original X-Men TV series that aired on Fox Kids, because with the ratings for the original Fox Kids show that came on before the Telecom Act of 1996, what happened was a 4 million views that would basically just cement the death of a TV show back in 1992 to 1997. And it basically would show that that show didn't have that much of an audience, because when you look at the number at 4 million views, that's not even a half of New York City. I mean, when a country of over 300 million people, for a show to go out here and only get 4 million views as a first-run program, I mean, I can remember back in the days of syndication, that kind of number would basically lead to a show's cancellation, because it wasn't enough people to be able to generate ad revenue for a show when it was on broadcast TV. And when it comes to streaming, when you're covering all the costs, this basically means that the show is operating at a loss. Now, based on the internet's initial response, this is what led to Disney going out here and renewing this show. But I don't know if this show deserved a renewal based on those really anemic opening numbers and the overall numbers being lower than shows like Echo, Ms. Marvel, and She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, because what happens with X-Men 97, in spite of the internet popularity, is it shows that in the real world that the whole Marvel brand has suffered major damage. And I believe that the Marvel brand has really suffered a lot of damage due to multiple factors. One factor is the just complete oversaturation of superhero products over the last decade. And I have said for years that there's clearly an indicator of that people are burnt out on superheroes. And X-Men 97 clearly shows that people in general are just burnt out on the superhero genre because these products basically come out every year. And with them coming out every year, the audience has become toned out to them, and they really want something new, fresh, and exciting, and X-Men 97 wasn't that. And that's the other problem with X-Men 97 that ties into the demographics. Now, in the demographics, Disney says that many Gen Z were not into the X-Men, and I can understand why that many Gen Z weren't into the X-Men, because we haven't had the X-Men being popular for over about 20 years now, ever since the days of the end of the Legacy virus. People haven't really been into the X-Men, and even before that with Onslaught, a lot of people were getting turned off with the X-Men due to the extremely bad writing on the comic. And that's one of the reasons why people weren't into the X-Men. And again, many Gen Z don't even know who the X-Men are. One, because they haven't really been exposed to any of the X-Men comics, because comic shops basically were down to about 500 comic shops in the United States at this point. And most kids have not even ever seen anything X-Men in about 15 years, because the last time we had an X-Men show on the TV was X-Men Evolution, and I believe that ended about 2007, so it's about maybe 13, 14 years. So an entire generation has grown up without X-Men, but you have people out here saying, oh, X-Men 97 was big. No, X-Men 97 was big with many of us Gen Xers. It was big with many millennials and even some of the baby boomers. But those young customers that Disney needs in order to make money really didn't care about this show, because Marvel didn't need to take the time to invest in making another X-Men project. Maybe they did Wolverine and the X-Men, but that really wasn't anything it was a blip on the radar. But the whole thing is nothing really let kids know that X-Men existed for a good 10 to 15 years to answer that critical question that kids would need to have presented to them. Why should we care? I mean, it's hard to care about an X-Men show that came out over 30 years ago. I mean, many TV executives were not really seeing this from the perspective of a young person, because many of these guys have been in the job for too long, and because they've been in the job so long, they're thinking, oh, I'll revive X-Men 97 to capitalize on the nostalgia wave. Unfortunately, when it came to young viewers who never grew up experiencing anything X-Men or X-related because of the drought with the comics and the complete drought as related to the distribution of comics in comic shops and the MCU basically not focusing on X-Men, there was no way for the studio to capitalize. And as they launched this 30-year-old show high on nostalgia, they weren't really thinking about where their audience was, because with the audience of younger people, these kids had never been exposed to anything X-Men. At the most, they saw the MCU, but they never understood why the X-Men were so hot, and that's why many people didn't have that incentive to tune in to X-Men, because their world was completely different. With most kids today, they have been exposed mostly to anime, and as they've been exposed to anime, they have been growing up with a whole group of different characters. And as they've grown up with this group of different characters, many of the Marvel superheroes are alien to them. They're alien to them because we had that generation of boomers and some Gen Xers and millennials who basically in the 90s went out here and made the comic book industry insular. And as they made the industry insular and prevented access to creators like myself and many others who wanted to reach out to a larger audience, what happened was all those people from the later part of millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z, and Generation Alpha, they grew up with a different group of characters. And as they grew up with this different group of characters, they grew up caring more about these characters from Japan than they did with American characters. And it's all due to the studio executives and those boomers and those some members of Gen X and millennials who wanted to close off comics. They basically wound up alienating the younger customer, and that's the main reason why we have X-Men 97 being a big flop in spite of all of its internet popularity. Now, this whole situation with X-Men 97 mirrors what's going on with the comic book industry right now, where yes, you'll get a guy who will go out and post an article on social media, and yes, it'll be a big hit on social media, but to the casual person, there will be next to no chatter at all. And it will be no chatter because nobody knows about these characters or cares about these characters. And while that website that posts an article about these characters will get thousands and hundreds of thousands of hits, that won't generate into sales. And that's what's been happening for the last 5 to 10 years with comics as related to superhero comics. Whenever you'll have a big controversy, yes, you'll have a lot of comic YouTubers out here talking about that controversy. You'll have a lot of podcasters talking about that controversy. But when it comes to the sales of those books won't really be a blip on the radar. And many of those books, instead of them having sales increases due to the chatter and controversy online, what happens is those books go into stagnant numbers, or those numbers go into free fall because people just aren't getting up from their computers to go to the stores to go buy those comics. And the same thing is happening online as related to the X-Men 97 show. Yes, the X-Men 97 show had people going out here and posting up clips of the show on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, talking about how awesome this show is. But when it came to the numbers for the ratings, X-Men 97 wasn't even half of New York City in terms of viewership. And if its numbers are lower than Echo's, then we definitely don't even have even part of the South Bronx as related to numbers of viewership. And when you're spending at least about $1 million an episode on a show for animation for each episode, that turns into a huge loss for the network. Now, I know they said they're going to renew this show for a season 2, but it looks like to me this show basically is going through the motions, because usually for networks, when they do these kind of shows, they usually do maybe 13 episodes for a first season and another 13 for a second season that's already been budgeted and allocated. Because usually when they do these shows like Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which only ran 2 seasons, they had already budgeted that show. They had already shot all of that show. And basically what they were going to do is just run this show out as related to the quota of episodes, and it might go up to maybe 20, maybe 36. But the whole thing is, it's not really the big hit that the Disney Plus needs for its streaming service to really rake in those numbers for subscriptions. And that's where Disney Plus really took a hit here, because they were expecting X-Men 97 to really get those subscription numbers up. And it doesn't look like it really had an impact on the subscriptions as related to getting people excited. And that's where this show really starts to feel like a flop. Because, again, when you have a streaming service, content is king. And if your content isn't strong, then you're not going to have people incentivized to go spend money on this streaming service every month. And it looks like X-Men 97 wasn't strong enough because, again, you have a 30-year-old show that most young people don't know about, and the only thing you're appealing to is the nostalgia of older people, and older people are not going to be the ones who can make your streaming service strong as related to content. No, what's going to drive your content is trying to appeal to younger people. And it's clear to me that people at Disney really need to get off the nostalgia train as related to things and start focusing on developing some brand new original material that can compete in the anime marketplace and appeal to younger viewers, stuff that will allow them to rebuild the trust that they lost of many Disney customers who were offended and alienated by movies like Lightyear and other movies like Turning Red and other movies that they've done. I mean, what they need to do is look to rebuild that trust by making stuff that is family friendly and PG-13, stuff that families can feel safe about watching, because one of the issues I have heard so many times from people is that they do not trust Disney, and they don't trust Disney to go out and provide them with family entertainment, and that's what really impeded X-Men 97's progress, in addition to, again, being a 30-year-old show. Again, I keep saying 30 years old because, again, this show came out in 1992. We are in 2024. This is a 32-year-old show, and expecting a 32-year-old show to perform well with younger audiences was absolutely ridiculous when you consider how long the X-Men have been out of popularity in terms of comics and how bad the industry of the comic book industry is doing at the point, because back when X-Men first came out, the comic book industry was at a peak. There were thousands of comic shops, there were newsstands and grocery stores selling comics, so there was an already audience that knew who the X-Men were and who cared about the X-Men on TV. But in 2024, we have a completely different audience, a completely different audience of young people who have never seen a comic book outside of those that are presented by Scholastic as related to their graphic novels. I mean, most kids don't even know that a comic shop was something that existed, unless their fathers and their mothers were comic fans, and that's the real sad part of this. I mean, there's a real serious disconnect between Hollywood's executives and the real world, and it really showed with the whole presentation of X-Men 97. Yes, you had a lot of people online, like toy collectors, going crazy over the figures. Yes, you had a lot of people online going crazy over it on social media. But again, social media, we're finding out, does not really mean actual sales, and it also doesn't mean that there are actual people who are actually interested in this product. No, you can create a virtual following online, but that does not actually mean real sales, and it doesn't mean that there's a real audience for something. Yes, there are Wolverine and Rogues from X-Men 97 going right now on eBay for over $100 because people went out here and pre-ordered those figures back in December like I did. I pre-ordered a Wolverine back then. But the whole thing is, it doesn't mean that there's an actual audience. No, an actual audience we would get a barometer of that by seeing the subs, by seeing the clicks, by seeing this, and again, most importantly, seeing people subbing the Disney Plus. But we're not seeing that, and that really shows me that, again, there's a disconnect over in Hollywood as related to people understanding what the real demographics are. Because if you've got Gen Z customers saying, hey, I don't want to watch X-Men 97 because it's Grandpa's show, and it is Grandpa's show because, again, my cousin basically was a kid when X-Men 97 was on. He's almost 40 years old at this point, and the whole thing is, people are not looking at the scale of time when it comes to these shows. No, they're not looking at the scale of time of these shows. No, they're so caught up in spellbound in their nostalgia that they can't see the harsh reality that the audience wants something different. It wants something fresh. It wants something unique. It wants something all new and all different than Grandma and Grandpa's TV and movies. I mean, this is what the audience wants, but sadly, nobody wants to give it to them because they are afraid of failure. But the whole thing in life is that failure is a part of life. And in order for you to get a hit, you're going to have to take a risk. And taking a risk means coming out of the box and giving somebody something different, different characters, different stories that relate to today. I mean, we're not getting those, and that's the problem that related to most of pop culture. You have a lot of older boomers and a lot of older people who still want to give us their entertainment, not understanding that the world is completely different than the world we came from. I mean, after the pandemic, we had a completely different world. And again, that different world is not being reflected in the media that we're seeing today. No, a lot of people will sit there and say it's the WGA and SAG strikes that caused this, but no, I don't believe that at all. I believe this disconnect started even before then. It started with the what they call all new, all different Marvel at Disney and DC's New 52 starting to alienate customers, and then them not looking to go out here and tell stories that people relate to. I mean, that's why X-Men 97 was a flop. And again, the internet said it was popular, but what we're learning now is internet popularity doesn't mean real world popularity, because if internet popularity meant real world popularity, you would be able to generate those sales outside of the internet. You would be able to build that word of mouth outside of the internet. You would be able to build that following outside of the internet, and we would be able to see those numbers really start to rise. And again, we didn't really see it happen with X-Men 97, showing me again, not only is there brand damage as related to Marvel due to all of the dysfunctional content they put out in Phase 4 and Phase 5, and there's a whole disconnect as related to the audience, as related to the people giving them what they want. And the saddest part about this whole situation is that nobody really understands why everything is flopping, but everything is flopping for one reason, and that's because many of the people in Hollywood can't answer the critical question a screenwriter and a comic book writer and a novelist like myself has to answer before I put a finger to the keyboard for any of my projects. And that simple question is that you have to answer is, why should we care? Why should anyone care about X-Men 97 in 2024 when the world is completely different? Why should anybody care about the continuation of a 30-year-old show when you want to see stories that reflect your experiences and the media you've seen, something more like anime, something more with a basic character transformation arc and simple basic storytelling? I mean, that's what people want, and they want different characters. They want to see a different world, and I believe people are burnt out on superheroes as related to Marvel and DC superheroes, and they want to see different kinds of characters and different kinds of adventures, and they want to see somebody that doesn't look like somebody from 30 years ago. No, they want to see something new and different. And the whole thing is that many of the studios are so afraid of failure that they just keep making the same things, not understanding making 30-year-old concepts and 40-year-old concepts is a definition of insanity, because you're doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. And the whole thing is, it's just like the days of the 1960s when the studios kept making musicals and epic and war movies. They were disconnected from the audience that just came through a Vietnam War, and they're still in the same phase, and again, but the sad part is they won't let anybody new come in to breathe some new life into entertainment, and that's why we're seeing shows like X-Men 97 flop. Again, this show was supposed to do better numbers than what they expected, and again, yes, the internet is talking, but what we're learning from this whole experience is that the internet's talk is cheap, because the internet's talk doesn't lead to the sales that makes a show like X-Men 97 be the big hit that everybody brags that it's supposed to be. Now, if you want to pick up my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com right now by clicking the link in the description box, and you can get that comic for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to pick up my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, you can find that comic on Kindle for 99 cents on Amazon.com. And you can, if you want to pick up many of the books in the SJS Direct universe, which features action-packed fantasy fiction, you can pick up books in the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, and the Spinsterella trilogy. You can also pick up my Black Vampire novel, Eternal Night, and my sorority novel, The Thedas, and my business novel, Recipe for Success. You can find all of those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com, and you can also find them in digital format at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and you can also find them at big box retailers like Walmart and Target by ordering them online. And if you'd like to see me make more videos about comics, science fiction, and fantasy, and be able to have the money to be able to make my next SJS Direct comic and buy independent comics for comic reviews, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback at e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.